The crisp autumn morning in Boston wrapped the city in a refreshing breeze, and the maple trees along Maple Street had begun to turn red and yellow. Abigail Morrison stood by the bedroom window of her new home, taking a deep breath as she gazed at the scenery outside. A year ago, she had married Brian Winters, a restaurant owner in this city, and her life had changed dramatically. "Breakfast is ready." Brian's voice echoed from the kitchen. Abigail smiled as she descended the stairs. In the kitchen, Brian was skillfully flipping pancakes while wearing an apron. As the owner-chef of Winter's Taste, he enjoyed showcasing his culinary talents at home as well. "Good morning, Chef." Abigail wrapped her arms around his back and gave him a light kiss. "Today's special is blueberry pancakes with a secret recipe. Perfect for calming your nerves," Brian said with a wink. Abigail placed her hand over her mouth, her expression turning slightly nervous. "Is she really coming today?" Brian's face grew serious as he took her hand. "Yes, Mother is scheduled to arrive this afternoon. It'll be a long flight, so she might be a bit tired." Despite being married for a year, Abigail had never met Brian's mother, Elizabeth. Elizabeth had lived in Europe for many years and didn't attend their wedding. The reason given was health issues, but Abigail suspected there might be something else. During breakfast, Brian began talking about his mother. "Mother is a bit eccentric, but she has a kind heart. She changed a lot after Father passed away." Abigail had noticed that whenever Brian spoke about his mother, his tone of voice subtly changed. She got the impression there was something he wanted to say but couldn't. "How was her relationship with Caroline?" Abigail asked carefully. Caroline was Brian's former wife who died suddenly 5 years ago from an undiagnosed illness. Brian's expression stiffened momentarily. "It was complicated. At first, things went well, but later." He trailed off and took a sip of coffee. "But that's in the past. Mother will surely like you." It seemed even Brian himself knew there was little confidence in those words. Abigail was a successful graphic designer who owned her own studio and was trusted by many clients. She and Brian met at a mutual friend's party and hit it off immediately. Abigail was attracted to his culinary talent and passion, while Brian was captivated by her creativity and strength. When they decided to get married, everyone around them offered their congratulations, except for Elizabeth. "What does she think about Winter's Taste?" Abigail asked about Brian's restaurant. "Actually, Mother and Father started it together. They both had culinary talent. After Father died, Mother didn't want to give up the restaurant, but there were too many memories. So she entrusted it to me and went to Europe." Abigail nodded.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
Silently. Winter's Taste was a highly regarded restaurant in Boston, with Brian's innovative menu and attention to detail attracting many customers. He had made significant changes to the restaurant's management policies and interior design, giving it a more modern atmosphere. Abigail wondered how Elizabeth felt about that. In the afternoon, Abigail left her office early to prepare for Elizabeth's arrival. Fresh flowers had been arranged in the living room, and Elizabeth's favorite music was playing. "Ready?" Brian asked as he picked up the car keys. "As ready as I can be," Abigail smiled, though anxiety lingered in her heart. As they drove to the airport, Brian took Abigail's hand just once and said, "It'll be fine, I'm sure everything will work out." However, despite his words, tension was evident in his voice. "Mother probably has something special prepared," Brian said. "She always prepares something traditional when welcoming a new family member." Abigail looked at him in surprise. "For me?" "Yes," Brian gripped the steering wheel tightly. "No matter what happens, be careful not to anger her." Those words sounded like a warning, planting seeds of anxiety in Abigail's heart. She couldn't help imagining what her relationship with her soon-to-be mother-in-law would be like. Elizabeth Winters walked briskly through the lobby, showing no signs of fatigue from her long journey. Dressed in an elegant tweed suit with perfectly styled white hair, Abigail felt her tension rise the moment she saw her. "Brian, it's been a while." Elizabeth opened her arms toward her son. Her voice was sweet yet contained an unfathomable strength. "Welcome back, Mother." Brian embraced her with a somewhat tense demeanor. Elizabeth finally turned her gaze to Abigail. Her eyes were clear and ice blue, but harbored a cold light within. "So you're Abigail," Elizabeth said with a smile. The smile was perfect but somehow didn't reach her heart. "Finally, we meet." "It's nice to meet you, Elizabeth." "I'm pleased to meet you." Abigail extended her hand with her best smile. Elizabeth lightly clasped her hand and said, "You look much younger than Brian led me to believe." Though it sounded like a compliment, there was something meaningful in her tone. During the car ride back, Elizabeth talked continuously about her life in Europe. However, the topics always returned to memories of Brian's childhood or remembrances of the late George. Abigail tried to gauge her mother-in-law's expression from the rearview mirror, but Elizabeth's face was covered with a perfect social smile. The Winters mansion was in an upscale neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston. Abigail and Brian had established their new home not far from this house. Upon entering the grand old-style house, a portrait of the late George adorned the entrance hall. "Dad's picture has a new frame," Brian remarked. "Yes, I found one worthy of him," Elizabeth answered with a somewhat sad expression. The interior was unified with heavy furniture, and family photographs were displayed everywhere. Particularly noticeable were photos of Brian with his father and Brian's wedding photos with Caroline. There were no wedding photos of Abigail and Brian. "I'll take your luggage to your room," Brian said, carrying Elizabeth's suitcase upstairs. The moment they were alone, Elizabeth's expression changed. She approached Abigail and quietly asked, "Are you making my son happy?" "Yes, of course," Abigail replied. "We're truly happy." "I see." Elizabeth studied Abigail's expression searchingly. Caroline said the same thing at first. At those words, Abigail felt a chill run down her spine. Elizabeth walked to the living room without saying anything more. Until dinner was ready, Elizabeth gave a tour of the house, recounting family memories associated with each room. George or Caroline appeared in all these stories. Caroline played wonderful piano in this room, George used to read the newspaper here every morning, and so on. Abigail was made acutely aware that she had no part in this house's history. For dinner in the dining room, Brian had prepared special dishes. Elizabeth took one bite and said, "A nostalgic taste. But it's a bit different from my recipe." "I made some adjustments," Brian replied. "I've gradually changed the menu at Winter's Taste as well." "I see." Elizabeth's voice contained a hint of dissatisfaction. "All the recipes at Winter's Taste were originally ours. The success of that restaurant was built by George and me." Brian silently nodded. His expression revealed complex emotions. "By the way, Abigail," Elizabeth suddenly changed the subject. "Do you want children?" Abigail was momentarily at a loss for words. She and Brian had discussed children, but they didn't have concrete plans yet. "I hope to have children someday," she answered cautiously. "Continuing the Winters bloodline is extremely important," Elizabeth said solemnly. "Our family has inherited culinary talent for generations. That tradition must be preserved." "Mother, that's a discussion for the future," Brian tried to change the flow of conversation. "Abigail and I want to enjoy our time together for now." "Time passes more quickly than you think." Elizabeth's eyes remained fixed on Abigail. "After I'm gone, family traditions must be maintained." Abigail couldn't determine whether these were simply the wishes of an older woman or if they held some other meaning. After dinner, Brian's phone rang. "It's from the restaurant. Looks like I need to address something." He stood up apologetically. "Go ahead," Elizabeth said kindly. "Abigail and I will enjoy some girl talk." When Brian left the room, the atmosphere changed completely. Elizabeth slowly stood up and headed toward the kitchen. "I've prepared something special," she said over her shoulder. Abigail remained seated on the sofa, waiting for her mother-in-law. Among the family photos on the wall, Caroline's smile seemed oddly vivid. What kind of person had the former wife been? And why did she die so suddenly? Elizabeth returned. In her hands was a small decorated box. "This is our family tradition," Elizabeth smiled gently. "When a new woman enters the family, she always eats this." She presented the box to Abigail. "I made a special cookie just for you. As a welcome gesture. Please, do eat it." Abigail took the box and carefully opened the lid. Inside was a round cookie placed on a delicate lace doily. The word "welcome" was beautifully rendered in icing on the surface, surrounded by small flower patterns. It was a stunningly beautiful confection. "What a lovely cookie," Abigail said with genuine admiration. "Thank you for making this so meticulously." Elizabeth smiled quietly. "This is a special recipe. A secret passed down through the Winters family." Her eyes gleamed strangely. "It's something every new woman eats when welcomed into the family." Abigail picked up the cookie. The weight and texture felt like a normal cookie, but somehow she felt a chill down her spine. "Shouldn't we wait for Brian to return?" "No, now is best," Elizabeth's voice held a subtle urgency. "This is like a welcoming ritual from woman to woman. Men have nothing to do with it." In the distance, Brian's voice could be heard on the phone. He likely wouldn't return for a while. Abigail examined the cookie more closely. "A Winters family recipe. What's in it?" "That's a secret," Elizabeth said quietly. "But don't worry, all natural ingredients. Herbs gathered from the forest, special flower nectar." Her eyes shone with expectation. "Try it now. I prepared it especially for you." Abigail brought the cookie to her nose. Amid the sweet fragrance, she detected something bitter and strange. An herbal scent, or perhaps, she controlled her imagination. However, feeling Elizabeth's eyes watching her every move, anxiety spread in her chest. "Did Caroline receive the same cookie?" Abigail asked abruptly. Elizabeth's expression stiffened momentarily. "Yes, of course. All new Winters women inherit this tradition." "And she suddenly fell ill and died," Abigail said slowly. "An unfortunate coincidence," Elizabeth's voice was cold. "She had a weak constitution." As Abigail brought the cookie to her lips, she suddenly remembered something. Michael, a chef working at Brian's restaurant, had once secretly told her Brian's former wife fell ill right after his mother returned to America. And Caroline suddenly deteriorated, and doctors couldn't determine the cause before she died. Furthermore, Elizabeth's words during dinner flashed through her mind, continuing the Winters bloodline, maintaining family traditions. And now, the beautiful cookie before her. The "welcome" inscription on its surface ironically seemed like a warning. In Abigail's mind, all of today's conversations, Elizabeth's attitude, and the mysterious death of the former wife connected. She stared at the cookie, sensing something lurking behind its beauty. "Come now, eat it before it gets cold," Elizabeth said in a gentle but somewhat commanding tone. Abigail slowly brought the cookie to her mouth, feeling its sweet fragrance along with a distinctly unusual bitterness. At that moment, something inside her issued a warning. As a graphic designer, she had always valued her intuition. And now, that intuition was alerting her to danger. When the cookie was just millimeters from her lips, Abigail made a decision. She slowly moved the cookie away from her mouth and, with a smile, looked straight into Elizabeth's eyes. "I'm sorry, but would you take a bite first?" As those words echoed through the room, the air froze. Elizabeth's expression changed completely. The blood drained from her face, and her eyes widened. With a trembling voice, she said, "What do you mean?" I can tell this cookie is very special, Abigail continued in a calm voice. Since it's so special, I think it would be best if the maker tasted it first. Elizabeth's eyes widened with fear. That's not part of the tradition, she stammered. This is for your welcome. I simply want to enjoy your homemade treat together, Abigail remained calm. She held out the cookie to Elizabeth. Please. Fear spread across Elizabeth's face. Her lips turned pale and trembled. Suddenly, she knocked the cookie out of Abigail's hand. It fell to the floor, shattering along with its beautiful icing. You understand nothing. Elizabeth screamed. Her voice had a strange tone, mixing anger and fear. This cookie was for you, only those worthy of the Winters family. At that moment, Brian, having finished his phone call, stood at the living room door. He was dumbfounded at the sight of cookie fragments scattered on the floor, Elizabeth trembling with anger, and Abigail maintaining her composure. What happened? Brian asked in confusion. Your wife rejected the tradition. Elizabeth said, breathing heavily. She's not worthy of the Winters family. Mother, calm down, Brian slowly approached his mother. What happened? Abigail calmly explained, Elizabeth gave me a cookie. But when I asked her to try it too, this was her reaction. Brian's expression changed. He looked at the cookie fragments scattered on the floor and his mother's distraught state. A complex expression appeared on his face, as if he had realized something and was afraid. Mother. His voice was low and trembling. You. Elizabeth suddenly fled the room. Her footsteps could be heard rushing up the stairs, and a door slammed shut somewhere. A heavy silence remained in the living room. Abigail looked at Brian. His face was a mixture of fear, guilt, and sadness. Brian, your mother. Abigail said, choosing her words carefully. What is this cookie? Abigail stared at the scattered cookie fragments on the floor and stood up with determination. She took a paper napkin from the table and carefully wrapped some of the fragments. What are you doing? Brian asked in a trembling voice. Preserving evidence, Abigail calmly replied. There's something in this cookie. I could smell it. Brian covered his face with both hands. Abby, Did you know? Abigail looked straight into her husband's eyes. Did you know what your mother was trying to do? No, that's not it, but... Brian seemed to be searching for words. I suspected. Caroline began to feel ill after eating Mother's cookie. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence at the time. But when I learned Mother would give you the same thing. Why didn't you warn me? Abigail's voice conveyed sadness rather than accusation. I didn't want to admit it to myself, Brian raised his face. Tears glistened in his eyes. I wanted to believe my mother wouldn't do such a thing. But I did say in the car. Be careful not to anger Mother. Abigail placed the napkin-wrapped cookie fragments in her bag. We need to have this analyzed. Wait, Brian took her hand. We need more evidence. Including Caroline's case, we need something definitive. They talked late into the night. Elizabeth did not emerge from her room. Occasionally, they could hear sounds of something being moved around from her room. In the middle of the night, after Brian had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion, Abigail quietly slipped out of bed. Flashlight in hand, she headed to Elizabeth's room. Beginning with the study shared by all family members, she carefully examined Elizabeth's belongings. From the back of an old filing cabinet, she discovered a leather-bound diary. Family Traditions was written in beautiful script on the cover. Abigail turned the pages with trembling hands. There was a page titled Secret Recipes for Preserving Family Purity, with detailed listings of various herbs and plants, along with their uses. Many plants had notes such as lethal or toxic. Even more shocking was a section with Caroline's name and date. Below it were the words, "Those who are not of pure blood should be eliminated." Trembling with fear, Abigail put the diary in her bag. She continued her search and discovered a small wooden box at the back of Elizabeth's bedroom closet. Inside were neatly arranged small bottles containing various herbs and powders. Each was labeled, matching the names recorded in the diary. As the morning sun began to rise, Abigail laid out all the evidence she had gathered on the table and woke Brian. "Look," she said quietly. "This is your mother's secret." As Brian turned the diary pages one by one, his face grew pale. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "That's such things." "It wasn't just Caroline," Abigail pointed out. "Other names are written in this diary. Your father's name, George's, is also here." With trembling hands, Brian opened the relevant page. Indeed, his father's name was written there, along with the words, "One who taints the bloodline." The date was a few weeks before his father died of a heart attack. Father was, by mother. Brian's words faltered. Tears streamed from his eyes. "We need to go to the police," Abigail said quietly but firmly. "But mother is." "Your mother is dangerous, Brian," Abigail held his hand. "She killed 2 people. And last night, she tried to kill me too." Brian was silent for a long time. Finally, he raised his face and nodded with determination. "I understand. Let's go to the police." At that moment, they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Elizabeth appeared in the morning light. She was perfectly made up and wearing an elegant dress, acting as if nothing had happened the night before. "Good morning, you two," she said calmly. However, her eyes settled on the diary and bottles spread out on the table, and her expression changed instantly. "What are you doing?" Her voice was cold and sharp. "You have no right to touch my personal belongings." "Mother," Brian stood up. "We know everything. About Caroline, about father." The blood drained from Elizabeth's face. But she quickly composed herself. "What are you talking about?" "That's enough, mother." Brian's voice was a mixture of sadness and anger. "Stop lying. Everything is written in this diary. What you did, why you did it." Elizabeth suddenly picked up a heavy bronze ornament from beside the living room fireplace. "You can't understand," her voice was cold. "How important it is to preserve the Winters bloodline." "Important enough to kill people?" Abigail asked quietly. "Sometimes sacrifices are necessary." Elizabeth cried out. "George was trying to taint the bloodline. He wanted to make the restaurant common. Caroline couldn't have children. They weren't worthy of the Winters family." Brian said in a trembling voice, "And I was supposed to do as you said. Marry the woman you chose, live the life you wanted." "That's a parent's love," Elizabeth coldly replied. "To protect you, to protect the family." Abigail slowly took out her cell phone. "I'm calling the police." Elizabeth's eyes shone with a maniacal light. "I won't let you." She suddenly raised the bronze ornament toward Abigail. Brian instantly stood in front of his wife and grabbed his mother's arm. "Stop, mother. Enough." During the struggle, the ornament fell to the floor with a loud noise. Elizabeth shook off her son's hand and screamed like a madwoman. "You betray me too. Your own mother. If you love me, don't hurt anyone else," Brian pleaded. But the light of reason had already disappeared from Elizabeth's eyes. She ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. The Winters bloodline must be preserved. At that moment, the sound of sirens could be heard from outside. Abigail had already called the police. Elizabeth's expression contorted with fear and fury. She dropped the knife and suddenly changed to look like a weak, elderly woman. "What have you done? Betraying your own mother." When the police officers entered the house, Elizabeth was crying. However, a cold calculation remained in her eyes. As they descended the courthouse steps in Boston's suburbs, Abigail and Brian felt like they could breathe freely for the first time. After 6 months of trial proceedings, Elizabeth Winters had been sentenced to life imprisonment for 2 counts of murder. The poison detected in the cookie, Elizabeth's diary, and her own confused testimony had been decisive evidence. "It's over," Abigail said quietly. "No," Brian took her hand and looked at her earnestly. "This is a new beginning." They had faced many difficulties over the past 6 months. Brian had suffered with responsibility and guilt over his mother's actions, often waking from nightmares in the middle of the night. "I should have realized sooner," he blamed himself repeatedly. "I might have saved Caroline." Abigail continued to support him. "You were a victim too. Elizabeth was manipulating your life as well." With the help of psychologist Dr. Lisa Johnson, they gradually healed their wounds. In counseling, Brian was able to talk in detail about his mother's controlling behavior for the first time. "Mother always demanded perfection," Brian confided during one session. "People who didn't meet her standards were constantly told they weren't worthy of the Winters family." What became clear during the trial was that Elizabeth suffered from a personality disorder with extreme controlling desires and paranoia. However, the forensic psychiatrist determined that she had criminal responsibility. Elizabeth continued to maintain that she acted to protect the Winters bloodline and showed no signs of remorse for her actions. "I'm thinking of changing the restaurant's name," Brian told Abigail one night. "There are many memories in Winters' taste, but we need to change it for a new beginning." Abigail supported her husband's decision. Together, they renovated the restaurant and relaunched it under the new name, Seasons. "Like the changing seasons, life continues to change," Brian explained at the opening party. A year after the trial, Abigail began compiling her experiences into a book. Titled Poisoned Welcome: The Reality of Domestic Control and Abuse, the book received much response from readers. Through speaking engagements, she also began supporting similar victims. The biggest change was their decision to adopt. Abigail's suggestion to create a family bound by love rather than blood ties was wholeheartedly endorsed by Brian. "Bloodlines aren't important," Brian said one day while filling out adoption application forms. "What matters is love and compassion." On the day their new home was completed, Abigail and Brian stood on the porch, imagining this house one day filled with children's laughter. Elizabeth's image was absent from the new family photos on the wall. Instead, the smiling faces of friends who had supported them were displayed. "We'll create our own traditions," Abigail said, holding her husband's hand. "Including cookies," she winked. Brian smiled and kissed her cheek. They had found value in a family based on choice and love, rather than the family based on bloodline that Elizabeth had tried to create. They believed that was the true meaning of family.